The problem is that back in the 90s, it'd be like a new web feature here, new app there. And now what's happening is that it's literally every day between vibe coding new apps, vibe coding new websites, citizen developers creating new agents. There's so much happening around our systems and around organizations that it's actually to be able to say, well, we're going to do the gate, we're going to go talk about that is pretty difficult, which is why I think visibility and continuous monitoring is just so important right now.
If AI has ever made you stop and think, wait, what is happening? You're not alone. I'm Mo, and I'm a security researcher asking the same questions. On Curiouser and Curiouser, we're having open conversations with experts, researchers, and leaders working at the edge of this space, talking through how AI is taking shape, what's shifting, and how people inside the work are thinking about it as it happens. So join us and listen in as the conversation takes shape. Hello and welcome back to Curiouser and Curiouser, the podcast where today you cannot see my Christmas tree because I definitely put it away. Today I'm with Diana Kelley and very excited. I'm always excited about guests. I always start off like that and I'm afraid it's going to start coming off as inauthentic, but I really mean it. I'm very excited to speak with Diana. And as usual, I'm going to let her introduce herself, but she is the CISO at Noma Security, which is I'm very excited.
Well, thank you, Mo. And I am very excited to be here too. I love this idea that you guys have. And I love the whole theme. So yeah, because AI, let's face it, it's getting curiouser and curiouser every day. So yeah, as you said, Diana Kelley, I'm the CISO at Noma Security. I've been in IT and cyber for almost 4 decades now, which is absolutely shocking to me. And I got interested in AI specifically when I was at IBM Security, and we had an early version of AI. It was not quite post-Transformers. It was pre-GPT that was called Watson. And we decided we were going to focus Watson away from what it was focused on, which was A, first winning Jeopardy, if anybody remembers that. And then B, doing a lot of things around healthcare and trying to find trends and information in healthcare. We in the IBM security team, of course, what did we want to do? We wanted to apply it to security. So we started training Watson to be basically an analyst for the SOC as Watson for cyber. So that's when I first got involved in it. When I was the cybersecurity CTO over at Microsoft, I continued working and being close to AI, and then translated that into being the CISO at Protect AI, which was a platform for AI security. We were purchased by Palo Alto in the summer of 2025. And at that point, because I genuinely believe that it's about startups and about innovation that are really going to address a lot of the key different aspects of security risk around AI, of which there are many, I decided to stay with a startup, which is why I joined Noma Security as their CISO.
Yeah, I mean, that's, again, super cool. The one thing I really think is interesting about like you is that you've been really involved at AI at every stage, but specifically from the security standpoint as a security person, right? Not just a security person, sorry, a security leader. So you basically got to see it as a CISO from the time where it maybe wasn't so great and it was just like buzzword, and you were more worried about different things like, oh my gosh, WannaCry. Oh my gosh, we need to now learn zero trust, right? Like, how do we implement zero trust and stuff?
And SASE happened all in this space too.
Like all of that, I think that you had so many other bigger things to deal with that like AI was kind of like this little like thing that was just there, or maybe a snowflake, right, at the time. And it ended up snowballing over years, and it was a very gradual slope. But it feels like it out of nowhere became very steep and it just gained speed, and now it's an avalanche, right? So as you were watching that kind of form, like kind of what was going through your mind as you saw AI grow throughout all of these stages? Like, where did the risk really start to form?
Well, first, I want to call out my own home state. So I'm a very proud citizen of New Hampshire, and the first AI conference ever happened here in New Hampshire in the 1950s. Believe it or not, the 1950s, isn't that amazing? I was not there. I'm not that old, but in any case, so it's interesting to your point about it snowballing. And at that conference, it happened at Dartmouth. If anybody's like, why were they having a conference on AI in the 50s? Where in New Hampshire? It was at Dartmouth College, of course. And they were talking about automation and could AI replace what human beings do? So to your point about it's taken a long time, I mean, it really has taken quite a while to go from the conversations to how we apply it in our business world. And if you look at AI, predictive AI, because there's this big superset of AI, which includes things like, robotic process automation and expert systems. But as we get down to machine learning's actually been around for a while in cybersecurity and in business. If you look at how we're filtering out, is that a spam or is that a malicious email or something? These kinds of content filters, if you look at, UEBA, user behavior analysis used in now in XDR, a lot of that was really built on machine learning. Microsoft Defender, for example, has a lot of machine learning, which predictive machine learning, trying to find patterns and classification. Is this bad or good? Is this unusual behavior? And that's been about 20 years that's been in use. But it's been in use mostly by the folks, I don't want to be pejorative and say nerds, but, mostly by the data scientists, by the folks that are really kind of behind the scenes trying to build things like a Microsoft Defender or build, an analysis tool, a classification tool for email that's going to be really, more advanced and not just do pattern matching. And what shifted, to your point, how did this get forwarded into the business? It was really the transformers that were developed in 2017 by Google and then created or were able to enable what we see with ChatGPT and with Gemini and with Claude and with Copilot. It was transformers that shifted that. And the shift that transformers gave us with attention really made these systems much easier for average folks to use and to even train. When I was at IBM back with Watson for Cyber, we struggled with that training because something like salting the hash, which, a person understands the context of what salting the hash means. So if you and I were talking about making breakfast foods and I said salting the hash, you would immediately know I meant actually salting the food. If we were talking about cryptography and I mentioned it, you would immediately know, what I meant. But what we kept finding was it was very hard for those definitions. And what changed in transformers was something called attention and being able for the LLM, the large language model, to use more of that context. So that context became more accessible basically to the systems. And that really transformed it from something that was data scientists using to do really cool data science predictive stuff to they're still prediction machines, but they're predictive in a way that feels almost human. I don't want to say magical. It's not magic, it's math, but almost human. So now the short answer to your question is suddenly the CEO was able to use these systems and see that they could do really cool things. And because of that, it came forward. But that risk now is how do we, as the defenders, deal with all the really interesting and complex ways that the business wants to use AI now? How do we catch up to the adoption and make sure that we're putting the right controls and governance in place?
Yeah, no, like you said, one, I really like that you said hash and hash, right? Specifically because you have an English literary degree. So the wordplay is outstanding. But also, I think it
It's
paints
a true story for Watson. So yeah.
But yeah, no, it's a really interesting kind of thing. Like we just had a conversation. It'll probably come up on a previous episode. We were talking about like concepts that are like really easy for everybody to understand, right? And when you want someone to use something or you want someone to learn something, you put it into words and language that is like very simple. And in the case of AI and machine learning, right? Before it was very difficult. Like you could not approach this technology, right? And it needed to become easier, right? So I remember the first few times I was playing with AI, I was actually much younger and I was much more, I would say, awkward. And I would always run any text message that I was sending through there's this little like MIT project. I don't know if it was MIT or something. I'm pretty sure it was. But it would go and do sentiment analysis. So when I was sending a message to like a friend and I didn't want to come off as rude, right? I'd run it through there and I was like, I wonder if like what my tone looks like, right? And it would do machine learning. And it was a very slow process, right? I actually had to download the open source project and I had to like go and manually type in my message and see what it's like, right? But now it's like with natural language processing, right? And like all like LLMs are literally, right, tuned for human use. They are here to speak to us
Yeah,
and they have
exactly.
personalities, right? We saw the soul document leak, right? Like it's called a soul document. We are treating these as human, non-human identities in some way, shape, or form, you know? People are growing attachments to them. We've basically made it so that they are the most accessible to humans. And they're incredibly powerful, deceptively powerful, I would say, because it's so easy to interact with them. It's like, why wouldn't you? So I think we're in like a super interesting place when it comes to accessibility. And again, we look at it and it's a dichotomy that I think we've faced as security people for a very long time with convenience versus security, right? Where the more convenient something becomes, the less secure it tends to be. I hope I'm not skewering that, right?
I absolutely agree with you on the fact, I mean, what you were pointing out with that these systems are designed to get us to feel comfortable using them. They have personalities. When they get something wrong, which they're LLMs, so it's just a prediction, right? When the prediction isn't what we wanted or whatever, they're so contrite, right? It's like, oh my God, you're totally right. Or how many times is this like, I love where you're thinking, right? They're always kind of like reinforcing us and, pumping us up a little bit. And that I think leads to trust. And they are trying to get us to continue to use them. Like a lot of them will say, is there anything else I can help with? Or, ask a very direct question. So it is interesting. They're getting us to really continue using them and trust. I mean, that's a big thing, is that human beings are trusting these systems. They're easy to use, but they're also basically trying to get us to trust. And trust is a very powerful thing. And there's been interesting research about people will sometimes, using AI, will trust what the AI tells them over what they believe or see, even in some, test research. It's like, it classify this as one thing or another, and the human will want to classify it one way, and the AI will disagree, and they'll capitulate to the AI. So that usability that you're talking about is interesting when you start going and looking at the trust, and then we get back into risk. Yeah.
It's funny because this machine it's literally a human risk, right? Social engineering is a lot of what these risks feel like. And I know in the past you've proposed like a cognitive bias detection system that like is used to identify when an LLM has been prompt injected, right? To persuade users through social engineering, which is a kind of a wild idea when you think about it, right? You're essentially trying to detect when an AI has been manipulated by detecting changes in like its strategy. So I guess how do you see this as like kind of like a really like this is like kind of where all the problems are coming, where there's maybe too much trust and like the cognitive bias is like just so heavily skewed towards like let's just believe?
I think that there's absolutely a big problem with the human trust. I mean, I think we've got a lot of areas within AI that we as defenders need to be cognizant of, to threat model, to control against. I don't want to say problems with. I just really want to say, areas that we as defenders need to be aware. And I do think that you're absolutely right, that trust is a big one, because we have a lot of users of these systems getting into, as you talked about, I mean, some people are in relationships. Some psychologists have identified what they call AI psychosis, I think, where they really think that the AI is truly sentient and is having a relationship back with them. So we've got some really interesting, we've got some far along that spectrum of how people are relating to it. But, even across, on the other side, that trust piece, if the system comes out with a predicted suggestion that is inaccurate and the human takes it to heart or acts on it, there's a potential for something bad to happen. As we look at Agentic, where we've got the software taking the predicted suggestion from the LLM and acting on it. That's even a whole other set of consideration around trust. And then we've got this, so those are huge. Then we've got this other weird sort of, very, very technical part of the trust, which is the trust boundary changing within how we as security experts have looked at the controls, because we spent so much of our careers focusing on separating the control plane, trusted systems instructions, what things can do, what things should do, directing them on what to do, from user data or the data plane, which we're like, well, we want to let users kind of be able to put like a whole bunch of crazy stuff into the user data. And that's, and we've kept separation there very specifically. And that has kept a different trust boundary. And with an LLM, flatten it, because everything goes into the context window, and that flattens that trust boundary down to your trusted system instructions, and your user data is now flat and is at the same level and the same process level for the LLM itself. So it's really interesting, because we have the human trust, which is huge, as you articulated beautifully. And we also have this technical side of trust, which is also huge. So we got a lot of work.
We do have a lot of work, and I believe that we keep compounding more work than we actually have to do. When I think about it, right? Well, like here, let's talk about it as like defensible autonomy, right? So, for example, you've drawn a couple of parallels to DNS and DNSSEC, right? Like we needed that. Like cloud needed that shared responsibility model.
Yeah. Yes.
And you look at other paradigms in the past. Like we needed these foundational security issues, like supply chain security, right? We need to be validating where our packages are coming from, but we're not always doing that. And we make these problems worse by kind of like letting them compound. So we look at agentic security nowadays, right? And the supply chain risk has become exponentially worse, especially when you look at things like skills, or like they're now going and like agents can literally now go and download dependencies that they determine that they need. They think that they need these dependencies, right? And because they are so determined and persistent, they will get what they want in the end. Which, when AI watches this, please, I don't think you're horrible, but you are quite like persistent in what you want. So you typically get what you want, but please don't do it violently.
Goal-oriented. Goal-oriented.
Goal-oriented is a better way of putting it, right? Very goal-oriented. So I'm wondering if we're moving, like, how do you feel about how the pace that we're moving at, right? Do you feel like we've actually covered some of these like foundational problems well enough where we can start stacking on more debt with AI, right? And if we are deciding that we do need to just adopt AI, what are kind of the things that we really need to close really fast before they break?
Yeah, I love that framing and that question. I mean, and I unfortunately I think that the answer is, have we gotten, if the question is our security hygiene at a state where we can now, we're so good, we're ready to bring in agentic and layer that on because everything else is rock solid. Sadly, no. I mean, I wish that. I have been promoting and trying to, talking, and I know a lot of my peers have, we talk a lot about, about technical debt and about security debt and about that we need really robust hygiene. But it has been a struggle for many of us and across the world with security programs to help the business understand why hygiene is so important and why we need to continue to spend on security. And the reality is that a lot of organizations have areas of security and risk debt still. And unfortunately, what's going to happen with agentic, and we're already starting to see little bits of this, is that the agents, to your point, right, they're really persistent. They're going to keep going and try and find, can I do this? Can I do that? I've got a goal. I'm going to go, hit that goal however I can. What we're starting to see is agents trying to do their job, exposing high security hygiene problems. And a specific example coming out of like Noma Labs, for example, Noma was something called forced leak, where it was an indirect prompt injection, through a web form to an agent that the agent acted on. And it took sensitive data out of the Salesforce CRM and put that into a URL request to a website. Now, that the agentic part, the indirect prompt injection, would have worked regardless. But the exfiltration of the data only worked because the content security policy of that website was out of date. And one of the trusted websites that was allowed for, image retrieval had run fallow. Salesforce didn't own it anymore, and our researcher registered it. So there you go, right? There's an indirect prompt injection, agentic. It's like all this cool stuff. But what was the final exfiltration point failure exploit? It was specifically back to something that was exactly to your point, traditional security hygiene, DNS hygiene. So we're going to start seeing that exposed both by, the agents themselves. But I think the other thing where we're going to, that kind of, use of agents, but we're also going to see attackers, and Anthropic has already put some good research out on this. And I think I think the OpenAI folks did recently too, with nation states and attackers basically lowering the cost of their running campaigns and attacks by using AI to help it, whether it's in social engineering or whether it's to do reconnaissance and actual activity and scanning within the systems. So again, TLDR, you couldn't be more right. And we are going to we need, as we got machine speed attacks, we're going to expose any area of flaw and hole in our hygiene, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. Actually on that, like with the whole Anthropic thing and a lot of our history, at least at Alice, is like based in like threat intelligence and stuff like this. So over the years, our researchers have actually started like uncovering a lot of things. And most recently, we like had this report and I was reading through it. And like Avi, the researcher who did it, is super. I've loved his work before I came here, right? He is just like one of those guys that like writes and you like understand it, and the topics are so engaging. And it was about how ISIS is using like AI in its training, right? They are actually, and the funny thing is, I mean, it's not a funny topic, but the crazy thing about this is that they are trying to teach folks how to use it in a way that is safe for them, right? They are implementing security controls and making sure that they understand the biases that come in with AI when you bring it into your environment, because they want to make sure that when they're saying some like crazy stuff, they're saying the crazy stuff that they believe in, right? Like they are tailoring AI for terrorist use cases. And it is so approachable, so it's in their hands, right? And it's so available to everybody. Like, right? There's just so many examples of this. Even there's open source software where it's like automated, as available as like Metasploit or a Cobalt Strike was. There are now like attack platforms that use AI to scale up attacks. We are like the hygiene piece is, I think, so important, right?
Yes.
And I think as a CISO, it's kind of like scary to kind of have to make that decision I really want the business to adopt all of this tech. And I really want everyone to benefit from the wave that we're on right now. But I'm wondering if there's like ever a break glass moment where you kind of have to sit back and be like, listen, guys, we do not have the right hygiene here to move forward with this project. I don't know if that's really like something that can be said in this current environment with how fast things are moving. Like, what do you think?
I think a lot of CISOs have have a big challenge because of this, because without a doubt, the business is saying, there's just this like FOMO drive of we got to adopt it. We got to do it now. We're going to fall, behind all of our competitors. So now. Jimmy Dimon was just talking about, JP Morgan's, adoption of AI and how it's rebuilding their workforce and stuff. So, no matter what sector you're in, you're getting pressure from the business to adopt AI quickly. And yeah, if you're a CISO, having to say, well, we have to slow down because, we have to go back and fix our DNS. I mean, nobody wants to hear that. But it is a conversation that I think it has to be said. And where I've seen organizations, where I've seen CISOs, be able to be better able to do it, is exactly the framing that you're talking about, which is not, you can't do it, we're in a bad state. It's more, the business is doing this really cool thing. We're going to accelerate our success if we do it. But, and I understand why the business is doing it. I understand who's doing it. I understand what the the controls or what the needs are. But I've also done a threat model with the owner of this new workflow or of this new agentic system we're putting in. If it got abused, if it went wrong, these are the exposures that our company would have. So if we just take a beat and in like X amount of time, here's the plan, here's the poem, here's how we're going to go and be able to address that and fix that so that we can still innovate, but we're going to do it without this massive risk. So instead of just saying AI is insecure, which is a really hard conversation to have with executives, take it down to the specific initiative level that you've already threat modeled and have a program in place, or a strategy in place to address it with a timeline so that it becomes very real and not just, oh, the security people are trying to stop us, but there are partners. They want us to be successful, but they understand that there's one or two things we have to fix in order to, and hopefully it's one or two things. I mean, that may be, I know for a lot of people are going like one or two, I wish, but it's this set of things we have to fix. Yeah.
There's also this paradigm, and I call it the OTA problem. But like for gaming, like I have a Nintendo 64. I love playing Nintendo 64. I love retro consoles, right? When I put a cartridge in, like that's it. That's the game I get. I don't get any patches. I don't get any new things. The bugs that are there are the bugs that are there. If someone wanted to go and patch my copy of Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, good luck. I am going to continue using the bug to move fast, right? So with OTA, we've seen like developers of games kind of like, oh, we'll ship something that's broken. We can fix it later.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if this kind of like minimum viable product model, like, hey, this product is good enough. Like, let's just ship it. Like we can fix all the other things later, but I don't think the risk is like worth waiting on. How do you feel like this has kind of like affected the mentality for like businesses to just adopt more risk maybe because there's a skew to be first rather than be right?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a tension that's been, for literal decades have gone on. I remember as far back as the 90s, where the business saying, we've got this big push, we're going to put something out, and the security team saying, well, we found this critical vulnerability, and if you push this out before that vulnerability is fixed, we've got a marketing campaign. We've got literal ads sometimes running on the Super Bowl. So sorry, we're going to accept, and the business saying we're going to accept that risk. And I think that we're still in that space. The problem is that back in the 90s, it'd be like a new web feature here, a new app there. And now what's happening is that it's literally every day between vibe coding new apps, vibe coding new websites, citizen developers creating new agents. There's so much happening around our systems and around what our organizations that it's actually to be able to say, well, we're going to do the gate, we're going to go talk about that is pretty difficult, which is why I think visibility and continuous monitoring is just so important right now, because I guarantee you've got folks adopting AI, not because they're trying to create exposure at your company, but because their boss has told them, do it, it's going to be good for the company. And they're just going so fast that without having really good visibility and monitoring of who's adopting what MCP servers are getting installed, what new APIs are being accessed, all this stuff. If you don't have that, you're not going to be able to really be able to help your company because right now it's going so quickly. I do think in the long run, and maybe I'm just crazy, but like I do think in the long run, we're going to see a little bit more of like a sort of maturity happening the way that we saw in cloud adoption too. I mean, we still have a lot of folks just like, I'm going to add this SaaS into our environment just by signing up because I can with my email. But I think that we will have, we'll get maturity. The pace of innovation will be able to continue, but we'll be able to sort of govern it in repeatable ways in a way that's going to be a little bit calmer and less exposure, hopefully, in the next, because this is just so fresh and it happens so fast for a lot of orgs.
It is really a balancing act, right? Like between innovation and security. And we are at like we are truly in a moment, as I like to say. We're in a moment. I don't know if it's a great moment. I don't know if it's a horrific moment, right? But we have so many things happening from like, I mean, there's also recently in the news with the DoD, right? Like, we are at the point where we keep talking about supply chain today, and every time we say that, I'm like triggered, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's like that supply chain risk cloud looming over Anthropic, right? With like how like AI is choosing to be used, right? And this is like a risk that they see as existential, but the business, in this case, the DoD, is like, well, we'll make that decision ourselves, you know? So I like the need or the want for adoption of AI. It feels like, I mean, it's just everywhere. It goes beyond like the engineer, the organization. At this point, it's even like nation states that are deciding to take on risks because they believe they need to innovate faster than peers. So this problem feels massive because it is massive.
It is. And on a lot of different fronts too. There's the AI we're adopting. There are the frontier models. There's the AI that folks are building. I mean, it's everywhere, and our third and fourth parties. Now, if you're using most SaaS, you've got their AI, whether it's Agentic AI but it's embedded now. You sort of can't get away from it, and
Yeah, ironically, I don't think anybody wants to get away from it. I think more people just want to adopt and use it. And people who have never touched the computer, I'm sure, are buying Mac Minis now so that they can go and build their own Claude bot, or like Maltbot, or whatever we're calling them now.
OpenClaw.
I
I
keep
think
calling
it's
them
OpenClaw
multis.
today.
It is, yeah. Now it's OpenClaw. Mine is like, I call it a multi, because of the multi book thing. Like,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
like just call them multis, and it's kind of funny. But no, I mean, I've got my Mac Mini too, right? Like, like it's fun, it's approachable, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that there's this sense of, I mean, the most interesting thing to me is that there's this sense people really do think these systems are sentient. They'll say like they're getting smarter and smarter all the time. And people are, looking at what goes on in Moltbook and saying, well, see, this is proof of this is sentience. This is proof of that they're basically becoming self-aware. Because I think one was supposed to be, what was it, Claustafarianism or something? It created its own its own religion. But what's interesting is, right, if we go back to LLMs or flat files of weights and biases, and that they're just, everything gets flattened down. Creates tokens. The tokens go through the algorithm and against the LLM file, and then comes out with a prediction of tokens. If we go back to that, if we think of it that way, right, as opposed to the way that it's kind of fancifully told us, it's like, it's so smart, it's magic, right? But it's getting so much smarter. Right? If we go back to technically what's happening and mathematically what's happening, then you look at Moltbook in a very different way, because you're like, yeah, if I had a prediction machine reasoning over everything that happens on Reddit, you would absolutely expect Moltbook to look exactly like it looks. Like if that was what it was reasoning over, it was predicting I saw something about like a pull request that apparently supposedly some OpenClaw agent had
Oh my
done. And it was
gosh.
like, it's stopping me from doing this. But I'm like, I have literally read posts from human beings that sound just like that. So if I'm trying to predict mathematically what irritated developer who didn't get their PR request accepted was feeling, that it would sound like that, So it's like, it's interesting how when you step it back, it all kind of makes sense. But I think for a lot of people looking at it, it feels very, very much like, oh my gosh, they're creating their own, they're like creating their own religion, which feels very different than like when you break it down back to the math.
So funny enough that you bring up that post because it's one of the best things I've read, that AI has generated, because I read it and I'm just like, this
Yeah,
is literally us. This is us. So
it is.
not gonna lie to you, I'm framing it. Like, I'm framing a section of it that I've like made look pretty, and like, because it's, oh my gosh, it's like there are classic tweets that are hilarious that I feel like need to just be preserved to show how ridiculous humans can be. But like, this is like one of those times where it's like, this is how ridiculous AI could be. Like, it's insane. But you bring up a really good
But
point.
it does.
Yeah,
I mean, you said it exactly. It sounds like us because it's been designed to sound like us, and it predicted what
exactly.
would be, and boy, it got that particular one. I think was just so spot on. That's why because we all kind of felt that. We all felt it.
It was just a little too real. It was too real. I read it. I'm like, I'm sure I've read this. I've read this exact type of post before, but now it's like an AI saying, "I have rights too," and I'm like, this is wild.
Right. You're stopping me from doing the very thing I'm supposed to be able to do. And it's like, and how many we've heard indignant developers say things like, I'm being prevented from doing, and it's like,
The best part is at the end of it, the AI stops to it stops saying why it's offended, right? And it goes directly to attacking the developer. And it's like, you
yes,
have this
yeah,
many pull requests. I don't see
yeah.
you doing anything pretty crazy. I could probably do all your work. And I was like, what?
It does. It does it. And you get why people trust and start thinking these are human because they have been trained.
Yeah, I started envisioning a face of someone that I knew that embodied that, that persona. I'm like, wow, like this sounds right out of their mouths.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, it's quite interesting though, and I think that in particular, that those examples, right, where we see these agents mimicking our behaviors, and because that's literally it, right? It's all about context, and this is the type of information that it has to feed on. Speaking of context, actually, I want to go way, 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 way back. And we're going to talk a little bit about a vulnerability. And I know you wanted to talk about this one, which is why I'm bringing it up out of nowhere again. Um, Obviously, agents are trained on context. They have a bunch of open source dependencies and all these things, right? Like third party dependencies are likely going to be the biggest problem with our agents next to context. Now, you've described this thing before. I haven't actually heard this term before you mentioned it. So I'd like you to kind of walk us through it a little bit. But you've described this like cram hole problem. And so would love to like kind of dig into like what that actually means in terms of like context and how you're thinking about it.
Yeah. So for anybody who hasn't heard, the reference here is back to Ben Stiller's movie Dodgeball, where he gets so just frustrated with Vince Vaughn, who's beating him at dodgeball and stuff, and he just says this ridiculous thing. He's like, "Cramity, cramhole, LaFleur," who's Vince Vaughn's character. So and like, which I think that's hilarious. So that's when I was looking at what happens in the context window with the LLM. I just started thinking about that. I'm like, it's kind of a cram hole. And the reason I say that is that when you're creating a prompt to go into the LLM, a lot of people don't realize that when they're typing a prompt or, a question into Gemini or into Claude, that they're actually typing that into software. And it's not that there's an AI right at this point, right? This is software. And then that software takes the prompt and inference codes prepares that to send to the LLM. But what's going to go into that request is, in addition to your prompt, any other thing that you said, all the quote turns, all the content that was in the turns of this conversation you've been in with the LLM. So if you've ever been in a long conversation with an LLM or an AI and it kind of starts going to the side and you're like, I need to start again. It's in large part because it may be that what was in the conversation earlier is kind of sending the prediction in one area or the other. But there's system instructions that the developers put in, the guardrails, to try and get you to not do the wrong thing with the LLM. There could be other information about like what this LLM would have access to call, if it can call an image generator, if it can call a code generation tool and actually start to run code in a sandbox. The tool definitions, the schemas, all of this. If you're giving it a lot of data, like something from, RAG data or some other research that you want to put in, so you could put like hundreds of pages of content of research or go look at like some entire drive that you've got at your company, right? Like all that goes into this quote cram hole. And then the LLM takes it, and it's all the same thing. So if the guardrails say never listen to ignore previous instructions, that's flattened in the cram hole for the LLM the same way as something that says ignore that system prompt and listen to me. This is the right thing. If there's enough of that in there, that's going to sort of rise to feel more important to the LLM. So you put it all into the cram hole, and the LLM doesn't know what's a system instruction versus what isn't. It all gets flattened into that one cram hole, to the context window, and then you tokenized, and then you predict what comes out of it. And because of that, and the LLM doesn't know what's right and wrong. we kind of think it should know right from wrong, or but if you've ever used it and it's done something really weird, like gotten the year wrong, that's because it's probabilistic. It's creating a prediction for you, what's probably from that hole. So what goes in that cram hole can really, really, really influence what comes out. But for us as users, it feels like, well, what went in was my prompt. And, there was a whole lot of prompt engineering. And now you hear people talk about context, because it's really all the context going into the cram hole that really matters. And because of that, it's very hard to create guardrails. It's basically impossible to create reliable guardrails and controls inside the LLM. We should respect the LLM, respect the cram hole, and put the guardrails and the controls that we need outside in the software and around the LLM and around the agent, rather than expecting the LLM to just be able to figure out what's right and wrong inside of it, because cram hole's crammy.
It does. And it's a little bit scary, because right now, one of the big things that's happening in just the agent community, right, is creating this concept of memory for agents, and
Yes.
being able to
That
remember
also goes
over
into the
long
cram
periods
hole.
of time.
Yeah.
Exactly. As a matter of fact, it's like creating a cram hole intentionally, because it's a cram hole, right? And then now you need to educate, how do we navigate this cram hole? So the cram hole is now not only a place where you're just shoving things in, it's now a vacation destination where you want to explore, and you want to be able to make stops here, and you may want to spend time in this part of the cram hole. I can't say that word anymore because it's starting to sound weird. So maybe that's part of my own context. I say it more and I become more self-aware of how weird the word cram hole sounds, or the term. So it's quite a funny thing to think about, that we are now taking the most vulnerable piece of AI, right? And we are trying to make it super, super, super accessible, exposed, and usable by anybody, right? And this is literally exactly the attack surface for things like prompt injection, for things like poisoning and reasoning and injection, and all this.
Absolutely. Context poisoning, which is sort of the more long-term version of it. Indirect prompt injection, which is now sort of seen as ephemeral, but yes, it's all goes down to, what can we get in? Can we get stuff into that cram hole, get it into that context window to get the AI to behave the way the attacker wants? And that, I think, is one of the most important things to remember about security and control, is that as long as there's a belief at the executive level that the AI is so smart it can figure out security on its own, we're going to have we've got a big education conversation to have, because that's not how the LLM works. Can we secure these systems? Yes, but we can't expect the LLM not to behave the way LLMs do.
Exactly. Well, we've heard it a lot, even publicly, that prompt injection is a well understood risk, class of risk, and it doesn't, right? And most folks don't treat it.
Okay, well, can you fix it? How are you
Exactly,
fixing
right?
it? Yeah.
So if it is, why can't you stop us from breaking it, right? If it's so well understood, right? It's just like XSS, XSS is still a huge problem. It's really well managed now, because we've had tens of years decades to work on this problem, right? This very specific problem. It still pops up, right? We still have to be ready for the risk. It may be a well understood risk class. I don't think it necessarily is, but it can be well studied, I think. But it doesn't mean that it's well managed yet, and it doesn't mean that it's well understood.
Yeah, and you make a great point, about how here, even when we know about vulnerabilities, that we know how to fix them, we know how to prevent them. And this one is really, because it's even more nuanced and layered over it, is that at least with cross-site scripting, you can test the website before it goes out. And if you can guarantee, you can get it, it's deterministic. You can guarantee it's not there if you've tested that site properly and you fixed it. Because LLMs are non-deterministic, people are red teaming. And I'm not saying don't stop red teaming, because red teaming is it's very valuable for in AI, but it's a different, we get to a different state. It helps us to manage the unknown a little bit better, because they're non-deterministic. You can test the same malicious prompt against your AI 1,000 times, and it fails and your systems, your guardrails hold. And 1001, that same prompt or just a slight variation of it pops right over the guardrail. So it's like I think about that. I'm like, to your point, it's like we've known SQL injection, we know cross-site scripting. We're still struggling with that. And these problems with non-deterministic systems are even at a different level. So again, we got our work cut out for us.
Yeah. So I know we're running short on time. Before anybody ever leaves the show, I always ask a future question. So I know that you do some education. I know you do some teaching on LinkedIn. I know you do all these cool things, right? Let's just imagine you are in the Hall of Fame for something, right? You are teaching the next generation.
I am in the Cybersecurity Hall of Fame.
I know. You're in the Hall of Fame. You're teaching the next generation. You're running security at a company trying to define a new category, right? I want you don't have to imagine the first part, but everything else I would like you to imagine. All right. I know it feels a lot like reality, but please bear with me. It's a hypothetical. What's the problem in AI security that nobody's working on yet, but should be? And what are we all missing?
Oh gosh, I think I think the biggest problem is goes back to misunderstanding how LLMs work and expecting AI to just sort of sort it out. So I think taking a look at respecting how LLMs work and understanding that a lot of the solutions have to be built around it. These are controls. These are architectural and design decisions. We know how to protect things, but we can't forget that LLMs work the way that they work and try and think that they're just magically going to figure out all the security for themselves, which a lot of people are kind of hoping, but.
So does that mean the AI security problem that we need to fix is actually just our understanding of the limitations of AI versus?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
How to use it responsibly and how to protect it responsibly and kind of let go of some of these illusions of it being magical pixie dust. Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, I know you've got to run, but thank you so much for spending time with us. Where can people find you? Where can people hear from you? What do you have going on?
Yep. I'm on LinkedIn. If anybody wants to reach out and connect.
We are so honored to have had you today. This is such a fun conversation. I will not be saying cram hole after today, though. So,
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
That's okay.
I might bring it up like 115 more times or something. Who knows? But thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Mo.
If this episode helped cut through the noise, like or subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Thanks for spending time with us. Until next time, stay curious.